It's time to put a little balance back into your life, folks. Ian O'Neill here with Harry Powell, and we are going to break down last weekend's action in the UFC. Mackenzie Dern and Angela Hill went at it in the main event. Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, Edmen Shahbazyan was on top for the co-main event, and we have quite a bit to talk about throughout the card. Overall, Harry, what did you think of the card? It wasn't too bad. I I find it hard to get a gauge. I like to kind of tell everybody I didn't really watch it live. I watched it after it happened, so I had it recorded and watched it back, so I was able to kind of fast forward through all the BS really. And I kind of made the viewing experience a hell of a lot better for me rather than because normally what I'll do is I'll sit down and I'll slug it out for the 5 or 6 hours, and it can get pretty tiresome. But what did you think of it overall? I'm sure you that's what you kind of do pretty much all the time anyway, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So I generally life at the moment is quite busy for me, and so I try to optimize sleep as much as possible. And one of the things that I had to give up was staying up late to watch the fights. Now, there will be certain cards that I feel like I want to stay up and watch, or will stay up and watch, specifically when obviously we're doing the live streams of certain cards. But you've had the experience now, and the experience of watching a fight card the next day is the fantastic for me personally, because you don't have to listen to comms, there's no adverts, you don't have to wait around while they're doing VTs or anything like that. You just get to the bit that you want, and that's the fighting. Now obviously if there's certain fights you really want to see or don't want to see, you can skip through those if you want. Obviously that's more difficult for us when we have to talk about them, but on a whole, I enjoyed the card actually. There were some really really good performances, some really really competitive fights. There were some fights, I did not watch Alir Latifi versus Nascimento for long. But on the whole, I was very impressed. I was very impressed by Natalia Silva. Obviously, she was the severe spotlight this week. I was very impressed by Fluffy Hernandez and Edmen Shahbazyan for the most part. I thought Dern was fantastic, and obviously we'll get into those. Still some questions around Lupa Godina. There's a ton to talk about on the main card, and yeah, just some very very interesting performances that leave us in a situation where we could do this. I think this one actually could probably be a 2-hour podcast if we allowed it to be.
If we allowed it to be, we probably won't go that long, but let's get into it. And Mackenzie Dern went out there and won a unanimous decision, a dominant unanimous decision. That being said, I was impressed about her aggression here, and she came into this fight with a mean streak. And I think as a fighter, having a mean streak is very, very important going in there. You have to have, look at it, it's a dark, dark old game, so it is. You have to have those bad intentions. And it's something really that we've not seen before in Mackenzie Dern, really a consistent level throughout the fight. And she did what not too many people have been able to do to Angela Hill. Like, Angela Hill is a fighter who, look at, I always make the joke that I was always going to go to the decision when Angie Hill is in the octagon, but it's never too easy for the majority of fighters that she comes across, Harry. But Mackenzie Dern went in there and she did make it look easy.
For the most part, yeah. I think rounds 1, 3, and 5 were just decimations, and I'm kind of conflicted here because, in the most part, I thought Mackenzie Dern's ferocity and tenacity and willingness to sit down on her punches was fantastic. There are moments, and I will be critical because I think here now we're talking about a different Mackenzie Dern to the one we saw even in the Yan Zhao Nan performance, but also from the Mackenzie Dern that we saw make her debut, not that many years ago in the UFC. My critique is we're now fighting in MMA. And what I mean by that is you can only go so far by trusting your superior grappling to other people. There were moments in the Angela Hill fight where she's almost throwing too recklessly, almost throwing with too much power, and she's not setting her feet correctly. And there were a number of times where she almost overthrew so aggressively. She stumbled into a back body lock, or she stumbled into a head and arm of some form from Angie Hill. Now, Angie Hill wasn't able to capitalize on those positions with much. There may have been a takedown. There may have been some exchanges from that back body lock, but there certainly wasn't anything that troubled Mackenzie Dern vastly. But the warning signs are there. It's obvious that she hits really, really hard. I think you can make an argument for a 10-7 in at least one of those rounds of 1, 3, and 5. Certainly 10-8s in those. But there are two main things that I would love to see Mackenzie work on, and she clearly has been working on, but work on just as aggressively as she has been. The first one is bringing her feet to the punches that she's throwing, because when she cracked Angela Hill, and you made a perfect point, Angela Hill often makes fights really difficult for the opponent. She's the Neil Magny of her division. You go out, and if you beat Angela Hill, we know something about you. If you dominate Angela Hill, we know something else about you. And so Mackenzie going out and landing shots the way she did, gaining the respect of Angie the way she did, and then decimating her in the grappling exchanges the way she did, was vastly impressive. But the next thing I need to see more of from Mackenzie Dern is forget the arm bars. Forget some of the more cute grappling, controlling positions leading towards submission. There was a moment in the first where I honestly felt we could have finished the fight. She takes Hill down, or there is a grappling exchange of some form, and Mackenzie is looking for underhooks, and she's looking to slide her knee up. She's looking to free her knee line from the 3/4 mount. She's looking to do jiu-jitsu. You can tell that her brain is saying, well, this is where we get the arm bar. Whereas in MMA, she'd had Angie hurt, just smash her. And there's a number of times in my notes that I'm writing, just keep smashing her. Because there are moments in these exchanges that the referee is looking for an excuse to stop this fight. And Mackenzie Dern looking for the submission attempts, which were all defended pretty well by Angela Hill, were breaks for Angela Hill to recover, breaks for Angela Hill to not be able to find a way out of the fight. And so those are my two main takeaways from a negative perspective. And we can talk a little bit more about the positives.
Yeah, for sure. Like that one point that you made there was one thing that I was going to, it's like trying to find moments where you're going to utilize your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to get yourself into positions to get off shots rather than trying to finish by submission, because Angela Hill showcased some great defense from the armbar. She's very strong in that position. She did all the right things. She didn't panic, and it was clear early in the fight that she had the capabilities to fend off those armbar attempts or other submission defense. Now, maybe Mackenzie Dern tried again later on in the fight. She thought that maybe there might have been some weakness then, but still it wasn't happening. And it was one thing that I was looking at from Mackenzie Dern, which she did do in spells of the fight as well, is that when she did get to those positions, she was landing big damage, hence, the 10-8 scoring rounds as well. When I try to assess fighters, I try to liken them to those, what they would look like against who are at the top of the division right now. And whilst Mackenzie Dern is still a work in progress, I still think she has a ways to go. Those wild exchanges on the feet are going to get her in trouble against someone who can kind of use that against her. Forward movement and footwork, turning corners, landing shots, takedowns. It's something that she'll need to, like, she was aggressive, but she was almost over aggressive at times. And that is going to cost her. But she's going to look back, and Jason Perillo will be doing some more work with her to you want to take away some of that wildness and add in a little bit more technique, because the power is there. We've seen it. She's dropped Angie Hill. So it's more so like not wasting too much movement, not overthrowing shots, and more so sometimes less is more, really, when it comes to striking. When we always mention the Trevor Whitman statement to take it about 30%. I think maybe Mackenzie might have to take a little bit more than 30% off of her punches the way she was throwing it. But there was a lot of positives, as you said. What were some of the main positives for you, Harry, in Mackenzie Dern's performance?
So I think the ferocity and the willingness to be in the fire, the willingness to throw with power is, we can't understate how important that was, because in previous fights, Mackenzie has been outgunned on the feet, but has looked gun shy on the feet and has looked to merely use her grappling to crash her way through clinch exchanges to find takedowns. Well, that certainly wasn't the case here. It was certainly the case that she would take a takedown if it was available, or she would counter takedowns that Angela Hill would throw because of her overzealous striking. But there was absolutely no hiding from Mackenzie Dern in the striking. She was more than happy to be there, more than happy to trade, more than happy to be available. Now, I completely agree with you on that. If we were going to put somebody that had maybe a number 4 or a 3 or a 2 or a 1 or a C next to their name in with Mackenzie Dern, then that style, at least at this juncture, is going to cause her significant problems. However, the performance that I saw, and I'll go out on a limb here, the performance that I saw on Saturday night has given me more hope that we will see Mackenzie Dern fight for a title and be competitive for a title than I have seen in any other of the performances that she has had. Because what I saw, and look, I am still sticking by that I need to see less of the jiu-jitsu and more of the MMA grappling, meaning damage centric. But there are moments in that fight where you can see it start to click. You can see that she'll look for underhooks and then give up on the underhooks and land shots. You can see that when she's smashing and smashing and smashing, even from an armbar, she collects up the arm and has a cross elbow grip. And instead of just looking to break the grip like you would from a traditional jiu-jitsu perspective, she's just hammer fisting Angie's face. Those situations are progressions in your MMA grappling. And we'll talk about Fluffy Hernandez soon. But what Fluffy Hernandez did that was so good in his performance was he oscillated between big damage to force reactions that then lead to submissions. And that's what I need to see from Mackenzie Dern, because the road that she's on is the correct one. I was really impressed with her ability to counter the takedowns. I was really impressed with the obvious stuff, the guard passing, the mount control, the back control, the submission offense, the ability to see positions elongate as she's in them. And look, that's bread and butter for Mackenzie Dern. But now we're in an octagon and not a tatami mat. I just need to see in her next performance against whoever it is that we're going to get to these good positions, because it is likely that she is going to find herself in some form of grappling exchange in her next performance. And I want to see damage prioritized above all else. The submissions will offer themselves to her. And I think if she focuses on the damage, because of the potency of her submission game, the submissions will actually come way easier and way faster. Like, I would not like to be in the situation that Angie Hill found herself in, defending takedowns, defending her neck against a submission grappler of the ilk of Mackenzie Dern. And so I would much less prefer to do that when I'm battered, bruised, and looking for a way to escape belly down back mount, for instance, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Very, very well said. You mentioned about what may be next for Mackenzie Dern, and let's talk about that for a little minute. I believe she came out and called out Rose Namajunas, ranked number 2 in the division, next after the fight. I don't know. Is that a little bit too much too soon for you, Harry? I'm looking at the rankings here, and I'm looking at maybe a Jessica Andrade, maybe, or a Verna. If you want to go for a person who's got a win, you could go with Verna Jandaroba.
They've already fought, I think.
They have fought before, have they?
I think Mackenzie won, yeah.
Oh, well, then you're not going to really do that again. Yeah, that happened a little while ago. So maybe the Rose Namajunas fight is the way to go. What do you think?
I love that fight. Let me explain why I love that fight. So I love that fight because for the longest time, Rose has been celebrated for her grappling, and I think rightfully so. She is somebody that obviously has done a bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but has come up through that MMA grappling school. And so whilst there is a potency for submissions, she certainly wants to land damage. And, she may not want to pass the half guard. She may use the half guard as a method or a route with which to land her strikes. But Rose, for me, the vulnerability in Rose is when you find someone that's not willing to go away, find someone that's willing to try to overwhelm Rose, and find someone that's willing to put a pace of pressure and damage on Rose. We look at the Weili Zhang performance. There are moments in that performance where Rose begins to be overwhelmed. The one that screams out to me is Jessica Andrade rounds 2.5 to 3. And the first round, Rose looks untouchable against Jessica. The second Jessica fight, not the one where she gets dumped on her head, obviously. But there are moments in that fight when she just starts to wilt. And if you're Mackenzie Dern, that's obviously a 5-round fight. That's obviously a fight night main event or a co-main event of a pay-per-view or something similar. If that's a 5-round fight, that's super interesting to me, because the other side is, what does Rose bring to the table? Well, Rose brings supremely slick in and out movement, supremely slick striking. And that's the thing that Mackenzie Dern needs to face. Because if she goes to camp, Shawnee and I have kind of talked about this on Speaker's Corners before, but it's kind of like, in order for you to build a generalist skill set in modern MMA, you're going to need to spend camps. Now, we were speaking specifically about amateurs, but I think this pertains to Mackenzie Dern as well. You're going to need to spend camps specifically training for something, and then go and test that thing. So if you're, I don't know, pick an amateur fighter, whoever it is, right? If you're Max Lally, let's just say, whatever, and you're going to be fighting a guy who's got a really strong kicking game. Cool. Well, we're going to spend the next 4 weeks, a predominant amount of our time working on kicking game. And we're going to go out there and we're going to test our kicking game against his kicking game, or whether it's striking or wrestling or whatever it is. Cool. Well, if I'm Mackenzie Dern, I'm saying, give me Rose Namajunas, and I'm going to spend 8 weeks purely looking at my striking, purely looking at, not purely looking, but a large proportion of my rounds and a large portion of my training going to be spent looking at this specific element of my game, which is exactly what she needs. And if there's a test you want, Rose Namajunas is that test.
Yeah, it's very interesting because we spoke about, some of those openings that she was leaving on her feet. And I look at Rose Namajunas as a person who could take advantage of that. But if Mackenzie Dern can get through the fire, obviously, I think Rose Namajunas is obviously most dangerous in round one in all of her fights. And especially if she can get into her flow early and she gets that confidence up early. I don't believe that Mackenzie Dern would be able to wade forward and throw wild strikes against Rose. So I'd be interested to see what Jason Perillo and herself would have up their sleeve to kind of combat that too. So it is an interesting fight. And you know what? It shows that Mackenzie Dern has that level of confidence in herself as well to go out there and call out someone like Rose Namajunas. And, she's 30 now. She has a little bit of time. So, I was overly impressed by Mackenzie Dern. I liked what I seen, although, there's still improvements that can be made. But yeah, we're a work in progress here. But as you said, I'm more confident of a Mackenzie Dern reaching the top or maybe getting a title shot than I ever have been before as well. And I think that's a testament to her performance against Angie Hill on Saturday night in the main event. Another person who absolutely had a tremendous performance in the co-main event was Anthony Fluffy Hernandez against Edmen Shahbazyan. A fight that was kind of affected a little bit by a rib injury, but I don't think it would have really made too much of a difference, to be honest, because the writing was on the wall pretty early in this fight. And Anthony Fluffy Hernandez went out there and he did what he did best. He set a pace and he grinded and he pushed and he pulled and he landed shots, and he absolutely just drowned Edmen Shahbazyan. And I was like looking at this, and you know when you're looking at a fight, Harry, and you can kind of see what it's going to play out like very early in the fight. And I think we were talking on the group during the week, and yourself and Sean, about this fight, and you had said a couple of good things about Hernandez, and I was saying as well that I felt Edmen might have some success early in the fight. And there was a couple of little brief exchanges where he was looking well early in the fight, but I felt as the fight went on longer, that I was more confident that Fluffy Hernandez was going to be able to kind of increase that pressure. We've seen him drown fighters before. We've seen him when he picked up the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world title against Adolfo Vieira, and and yeah, and I think he did the exact same thing here against Edmen Shahbazyan. It was a really wonderful performance, and I'm sure you enjoyed it as well.
Absolutely. Like, if you need, to me, this was the perfect example of a guy transitioning over from more of a grappling background into an MMA arena, right? He goes out, and as you say, he's got cardio on his side. He knows how to use a pace. He knows how to set a pace, and he knows how to drown guys. The thing that impresses me the most about Fluffy Hernandez is, one, he can take a shot. Two, he's not unwilling to put himself in the line of fire, but he also makes the reads whilst he's in there. Edmen, to me, the success he was going to have is exactly the success that he did have. When he was fighting at range, he used his own length really, really well. Some really nice kicks to the body. He lands his 1-2 super, super cleanly. Lovely, lovely stuff. But the same problems are being found for Edmen Shahbazyan, which is the in-between parts. It's the parts where he's not able to reverse the tide as it starts to build up against him. One of my notes here is that about 3 minutes in, I write, this is typically the type of fight Edmen Shahbazyan is going to lose. And that was the case, right? Fluffy Hernandez dives in on takedowns, beautiful takedowns, some really interesting, intricate takedowns. One of the ones I'd like to highlight is he shoots on a single, grabs Edmen's far hand, tucks it between his legs, and passes it off to the hand that's controlling the single leg. And so as he chucks Edmen Shahbazyan forward with like a high crotch type dump, Edmen has nothing to defend himself with but his face. And like those positions, he then quickly moves around to leg drag, gets a wrist ride, and just pummels Edmen Shahbazyan to pieces. And the thing that impresses me the most about this fight from Fluffy Hernandez was he recognized very early where the success was going to be. And the success was going to be oscillating between submission attempts and damage on the ground. And so he didn't waste any time lurking on the feet, looking to prove a point on the feet. He just went in, he got the fight to the mat, and he did what he needed to do. And some of there were some things that just really, really, really impressed me here. His use of the cradle was fantastic. For people that don't know what the cradle is, essentially it's when you've either got a front cradle or a back cradle. Back cradles are probably more effective in MMA, but when you're chest to back against your partner sitting laterally, similar to a side control, but as if they've turned up to their side, one hand laces between the bottom legs and one hand laces as if you're getting a gift wrap, and you connect your hands together. And his use of the cradle to expose the back, to mat return Edmen Shahbazyan, to open up positions where he could improve his position and land shots, was just fantastic. I really enjoyed his turtle work. So from the turtle, generally, like, your option is to either get a far wrist ride and land shots, or it's to take the back, or it's to, mat return them, build them back down to a single hip rather than up two knees. And he was Fluffy Hernandez was looking for what we call a lat guillotine, or like an inverted head and arm choke, all the time, and he was using that, throwing a far hook over, knowing that Shahbazyan was going to need to turn inside those hooks and essentially give his back in order to escape the head and arm. And so moving between those two things was really, really beautiful. But he knew that whenever he failed on the head and arm, he could build back up height quicker than Edmen could. Just really, really, really smart use of modern mixed martial arts grappling from Fluffy Hernandez. Gorgeous performance.
And when we were talking about Mackenzie Dern and what we would like to see with her grappling as well, this is exactly what Fluffy Hernandez did in this fight here. You know what I mean? And I was just massively impressed by this performance as well. With Shahbazyan, you mentioned, like, what he wanted to do and what he does best is that he finds that pace, and I feel that he is a dangerous striker when he is allowed the time to kind of generate. Like, he wants to kind of fight at a slow pace, Edmen Shahbazyan, and find those shots. And I think to combat that, I feel that Fluffy Hernandez, like you said, didn't play around with the striking all that much. He knew what he wanted to do in his head, and he implemented that game plan with perfection in my eyes, because why go out there and take risks or try and showcase that you can stand and strike? You know, if you feel that you have a clear advantage, and I think Anthony Hernandez's advantage against a lot of fighters is going to be his pace and his cardio, because he can maintain it. Like, he's relentless throughout the 3 rounds, or until the fight stops if it doesn't last that long. And I think he uses that tool so excellently. But look at Shahbazyan, a guy who was once a huge prospect in the division, now 1-4, and that win against Lumbangala, who is not great fighter, to be honest, isn't he? Not Harry. What do we think we need to do with Edmen Shahbazyan here? Is it as harsh as to say that maybe he's just not cut out for the UFC?
I'm not sure that that's the case. I just think that Edmen needs maybe to take a little bit of time away from the UFC. And I'm going to say that for a couple of other fighters on this card as well. But for me, I just think he was pushed too soon. Very similar to a Darren Till, where pushed far too soon, built far too much hype around for what his skills actually were in reality. And now, I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to be UFC ready. I think absolutely he is of UFC caliber. But coming in against Fluffy Hernandez after just getting yourself back on the horse is a tough out. It's a tough ask. And unless they want to now slow roll Edmen Shahbazyan significantly and take him back to Dulce Yangiambula type level fighters for the next 2 to 3 to 4 fights, to allow him to build that level of confidence, because I think that to me was some of it. A lot of the ability to turn the tide in fights is down to confidence. It's down to the ability to say, no, I know I have the skills, I know I have the grit, I know I have the tenacity here to dig in and put my heels in the ground, and I can absolutely turn this fight around. Well, not so long ago, Edmen Shahbazyan was in there against elite level competition in exactly the same spots, having exactly the same thing happen to him. And so I feel like there's not been enough performance time, not real time, but performance time for him to be able to put some of that stuff behind him. Now, the other side of this is we could just be looking at, Chris Weidman post Luke Rockhold type situations or Rory McDonald post Robbie Lawler, where you've just been pushed through the grinder a little too soon and a little too much, and that just part of your soul has gone, part of your fighting spirit has left you. And if that's the case, that's an extremely sad state of affairs for Edmen Shahbazyan.
It absolutely is, because look, we've seen flashes of brilliance from Edmen in the octagon in the past as well, and I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to his level of confidence right now. And you're, even if you go in there and obviously you're preparing yourself and you're getting yourself mentally ready, but the start that he had in the fight that was a confidence breaker from the get-go. Obviously getting hurt then didn't help things, but I think the writing was on the wall. I believe the writing was on the wall before the injury happened. Let's talk about Fluffy Hernandez and what's next for him. What are we doing with Fluffy Hernandez? Are we giving him top 15 opponent? Do you have an idea who you would like to see him in with?
May I interest you in Caio Borralho?
Oh, yes. That is a fantastic shout there. Yeah, I like that.
We're gonna see, right? To me, this is the reason I like this fight. One, because if I'm Caio Borralho, this is a surging prospect, and it's a guy that I can go out in a co-main event probably, and I can help put on a performance against, right? If Fluffy Hernandez is not the guy we think he is, which I think he is, but if he's not the guy we think he is, he goes out there and he's going to struggle against Caio Borralho, who has fantastic top pressure, good grappling of his own, and can hit a bit, right? Could do a bit of the punching. But I think Fluffy Hernandez is better on the feet. And I would argue that his MMA grappling is more well-rounded than Caio Bahaya's also. And so if you're Fluffy Hernandez, this is a matchup which is kind of in your wheelhouse. And if Fluffy Hernandez is the guy that I think he is, he'll show out here too.
Great show. I would love to see that fight. So hopefully they make it happen. Moving on down, catchweight fight at 120 pounds. Emily Ducote was defeated by Lupi Godinez by unanimous decision. Look at Lupi looked great for 2 rounds and kind of faded in the 3rd round, and that's a little bit of a worry. I think she came out here and fought on the front foot. She wanted to push forward and land some big shots as well. Similar enough to the kind of maybe Mackenzie Dern was kind of approaching her striking on the feet as well. But you know, that little bit of over aggressiveness kind of cost her a little bit of cardio at the end of the fight where you know, she was getting hit a lot more. She was fading a little bit. And I mean, going back to Mackenzie Dern as well, is when you're coming up against stiffer competition, Harry, you're not going to get away with all those kind of things. What were some of the positives and negatives that you've took from Lupi's performance? I see you're shaking your head there, so I have a feeling you have some thoughts on your mind about her performance.
There is an element. So I by the time I'll go behind. We'll break kayfabe, and I'll release a world exclusive because this won't come out by the time this airs. But I spoke to Sam Creasy recently, and as part of the discussion that we had, he was saying that it's very difficult for him as a fighter in certain bouts, in certain exchanges, to not get dragged into a fight. And what he means by a fight is he doesn't move his feet. He just stands and he engages in pocket wars. And he says he loves them. He really enjoys them as a fighter. He knows that it's not smart. He knows it's not the most efficient way to win. And he knows that he's spent 15 years of his life building a ton of different tools that he can go out and win fights with. But sometimes he just sees a guy and he's like, we're going to do a war. And that's what happens. And the thing that frustrates me the most about Lupi Godinez is her grappling, her straight wrestling is so much better than so many of these women that she's fighting. And that was on display here. Emily Ducote was the first person to shoot. Twice she shoots. Twice Lupi Godinez immediately sprawls, snaps into a front headlock, and the first time lands 3 massive knees to Ducote's nose. The second time, just 1. She takes no damage. She lands big damage, and she can then re-engage on her terms. And yet, we only see her shoot a single takedown, and it's a takedown that is just kind of nothing in the midst of nothing. The problem I have with Lupi Godinez is she's sitting in the pocket and she's just banking on that she hits harder than the women she's fighting with. And in this fight, she was right. She was absolutely right. She hit far harder than Emily Ducote. But as we move up these divisions, as we move up the skill level, if you stand in that pocket as long as Lupi Godinez does and offer nothing more than a pocket war, you're going to get hurt and you're going to get found out, because there are women in this division that have significantly more variety than Lupi Godinez offers in the pocket, and they're going to be able to grapple just as well, if not better, than she can. And so if you want to have a pocket war, have one. But at least threaten some takedowns, at least threaten some level changes, at least make your opponent think that the wrestling is available so that you can have more success in your pocket wars. And the last 2 to 3 performances from Lupi Godinez have been so frustrating to me, given the complete lack of variety in her game. It's all straight right hands, big left hooks, a couple of uppercuts, and that's basically it. And it's just not going to be enough for her going forward. It really isn't.
So I have a question just to try and kind of figure out what way you're thinking here, because I have heard you speak before about, trying to develop yourself as a fighter and putting yourself in certain situation and fights. So if you are a good grappler like Lupitina Godinez is, and maybe you want to go out there and test your striking a little bit, so you make the decision, and I've heard you say it, and you want to be doing it at amateur level, obviously more so, is that if you're a heavy grappler, you want to make the decision, you and your coaches before the fight, to say, I'm not going to go for any takedowns in a fight. And okay, that's understandable at amateur, whether wins and losses don't mean jack shit. So do you think that Lupa Godinez is doing somewhat that kind of, like, is that her mentality coming in here? She's like, okay, the easy way out here is for me to utilize my grappling. But by doing that, I'm not really going to fully develop myself as a fighter. So she put herself in situations where she chose to kind of stand in the pocket and fire off and strike much more than she did with her grappling. Why am I kind of getting kind of contrasts in opinion there? I'm just trying to explain from your side of things.
So I think my opinion is, one, that should have been done at amateur level.
Yeah.
Right. But two, if you want to go out and test your striking against fighters, that's no problem. But we have 15 minutes here. We have 15 minutes and 3 individual rounds. If Loopy wants to go out and say, I've been working on my striking for 10 weeks and I'm going to come in here and the first round, no takedowns. Fine. No problem. No problem. But that first round didn't go so well that she can think, oh, well, I can just do this, right? She got clipped herself. She got marked up herself. She got cut herself. And so if I'm the Godinez corner, we have a plan A and a plan B. The plan A is we absolutely destroy her on the feet and we're feeling good. We're looking good. Everything's going fantastically. And we'll just run plan A again round 2. And it goes exactly the same in round 2. We run again in round 3. Fine. But the plan B is that we hit harder than her, fine, but we're getting clipped a bit. Well, now we've got 5 minutes of tape that we can go back and we can look at when Emily Ducote is at her freshest. So now in round 2, we're going to go out and we're going to grapple hard. And if in round 3, we feel like Emily Ducote is fading a little bit, we feel like we've had a lot of success, we've managed to get to good positions in the grappling, and we've managed to land some damage on the floor, well, now we have a depleted Emily Ducote that we can go out and strike with again. Or we have an Emily Ducote which we can go out and we can take down and we can try and finish again. I have absolutely no problem with experimentation. I have no problem with showcasing a skill set. But the most important thing in professional MMA is winning fights. That's the most important thing. The way that you get to a UFC title shot is by winning fights. Yes, okay, we need entertainment. We need all these other intangibles that Dana seems to want. But if you lose fights, it is far harder for you to get a title shot. And if I'm Lupa Godinez's corner, I am aggressively trying to ask her to win fights in the safest way. Now, just to reiterate the point I've made, because I think it's important. If for 5 minutes you want to go out and you want to test that striking, do it. Absolutely. Absolutely. But then let's make an assessment after round 1. What's the best way for us to win this fight now? Is it to grapple? Is it just to threaten grappling and then continue with our striking? Or is it to continue with our striking? I think, yeah, these are questions that need to be asked.
Very well explained there. No, I'm definitely on the same page as you when it comes to that as well. She got the job done. She picked up the unanimous decision and she moves on. Look at that fight was at 120 pounds. Obviously, Ducote missed weight ahead of the fight. That's why it was up at that weight. So credit to Lupitina for taking that fight number 1. What next would you like to see for her? Where does she go in the strawweight division next, Harry?
So I have 2 options. The first is, if she does want to continue with her striking, what about a Tracy Cortez? Because Tracy Cortez is obviously a good grappler, right?
Yeah.
So if we chuck her in with Tracy Cortez, we both know they're good grapplers. We might see what we generally see against 2 good grapplers, and that's a striking bout. Cool. That gives her an opportunity to test those out. If not, we could do a Natalia Silva.
Oh my goodness! Now we're talking. Yes, yes, yeah. I'd love to
This,
see that fight now. That would be good, and they're both on the same timeline too.
this is what I'm thinking, because now you have the Natalia Silva's gone out, 3 performances in the UFC, 2 finishes and 1 unanimous decision win. Fantastic. We know that she hits hard. We know that she's dexterous. We know that she's varied on the feet. And so if I'm Lupa Godinez, it's like, cool. If you stand in the pocket too long, you're going to get head kicked. Why don't we grapple? Let's see. Let's see if the variety is in the gap. It is in the arsenal still. Let's see if we've fallen in love with our hands, or let's just see if we were testing some things out against some opponents. Because to me, if I'm Natalia Silva, I'm taking that fight, because in the last 2 fights, I've seen a lady that just wants to stand in the pocket and trade. I'll take that. Thanks very much. If I'm Lupa Godinez, I'm saying, well, I've shown a much higher ceiling than this fighter against much better competition in the UFC. Let me go out and style on this lady. I love the fight.
I do too. I do. And something else that I loved on the night was Joaquin Buckley's performance against Andre Fijalio. I like. I had not seen any build up, no weigh-ins, nothing like that. When I saw Joaquin Buckley walk out and in the cage, I was like, "Holy fuck, welterweight suits this man." He looked yoked in there. It looks like he's at the perfect weight right now, and the performance complemented those thoughts really, Harry, didn't it? It was a tremendous performance. Finished Andre Fijalio with a second round head kick. It was just a brilliant performance by Joaquin Buckley, probably up there with one of the best performances he's had in the octagon so far in recent memory.
Definitely. This to me is what hyper athleticism looks like from a tactical awareness perspective. Immediately out of the gate, Fialo's like, oh, Jesus, this fella moves way quicker than I expected. And this fella has found a way to settle into a rhythm where he can explode, and he can explode over 3 rounds. That's the really impressive thing that we found with Joaquin Buckley, because clearly he is just a big bag of athleticism at his very core foundation. And he's worked really hard to build a level of technique. There are moments when it becomes sloppy and he's leaping into things and he's overreaching and he's almost too athletic for his own good, right? His body can't catch up with the explosions that are happening. But he had Fialo guessing and worried, tactically aware, as we like to say, of everything that was coming. He looked clean with his kicking. He looked clean with his defensive movement. There was a number of times he got jabbed up a little bit, and Fialo had to push the pace and did the things and was available in the fight for sure. But the story of this fight is growth from Joaquin Buckley. He is settling himself into the type of fighter that he wants to be, and he's bolting on little technical attributes and little technical advancements every time we see him fight. I can't really praise him enough. I think the fight itself played perfectly into his hands. Fialo, a patient, wanting to counter, a little bit slow, a lot slower than Buckley, a lot less athletic.
Could I maybe stop you with that point for a second in the way Fijalio fought? Because we have known Fijalio to fight on the front foot quite often, and he, when he's moving forward, he can move forward and cut off the cage very well. In this fight, I felt he fought a little bit more on the back foot. Now, the big exclamation mark over Andre Fijalio is his cardio is bad. He'll fade in fights. So maybe he was coming in here trying to change it up a little bit, obviously moving down in weight as well. Coming down to 170, I believe he did. Was it his first fight or moving up?
I think he fought at 155 before.
Fijalio? No, I don't think so. I think he fought. Let's check. I think he fought at middleweight before.
Inside kayfabe here.
No, he's always been a welterweight. No, he's always been a welterweight. But
welterweight, yeah, Van Camp, welterweight. Yeah, that's me. I thought he was 155.
No, I thought he was 185. So, geez, yeah. Well, anyway, he's at 170. His cardio wasn't great. He was fading in fights. I feel that he'd fought differently, fought more on the back foot, like you said, fought more to try and counter, whether that was to try and gauge his cardio. It didn't really work out too well for him. Look at, I'm going to stand up and admit, I thought Andre Fialho was a promising fighter when I'd first seen him, but I have to admit I was wrong about that, and it's just not working out for him. He it doesn't work for him when he's fighting on the front foot because he tires out. It doesn't work for him in this fight, obviously, on the back foot, but he came up against a really good fighter, and a fighter that was really kind of like Joaquin Buckley was going to be refused to be beaten in that fight. He came out there with a chip on his shoulder. He had bad intentions. He didn't give Fialho a second to breathe. Fialho, like you said, was confused, hesitant to fire off, just couldn't find an answer to any of the questions that Joaquin Buckley was putting at him. And yeah, I don't know. I think with Fialho, it's like he's not going to be beating anybody in around Joaquin Buckley or up. It'll be entry-level fighters like Cameron Van Camp and Beheza, maybe that he will be kind of fighting if he does fight. That's 3 losses in a row for Fialho right now. So, I mean, I don't know what's next for him, but it's not looking good right now. And I know you called it. You said you weren't that keen on Fialho, and I have to give you credit. You were spot on when it comes to that. But I think the story of this fight, and I don't want to talk about how bad Fialho was, because I think he was bad because Joaquin Buckley was so excellent in there on Saturday night, and the finish itself was lovely.
So nice, so nice. Like, it was just, this is what happens when you slowly and methodically, not that slowly for Joaquin Buckley, obviously, but you slowly and methodically take away a fighter's comfortability in the fight, right? Fialho, we know, is a front-facing fighter. He likes to walk forward, but he knew that he was going to be walking into serious danger if he just plodded on forward in that fight. Now, there were moments when we saw him on the front foot. There are moments when he clearly knew he had to throw caution to the wind a little bit and start to be more aggressive in these rounds. But he was getting punished when that did happen. He was not looking comfortable in there. And Joaquin Buckley's just superior athleticism, his ability to cut an angle, the power in his hands, the power in his legs was very, very, very evident. And the finish itself was absolutely brutal. The one thing I will say is I did not rate Kerry Hatley's performance in the actual finish. Joaquin Buckley lands the shot. Fialho goes down. Kerry Hatley steps in halfway, but something that we see a Mark Goddard or a Jason Herzog or others do is they will literally put their entire body in front of the fighter and will immediately wave things off. Immediately, hands are in the air, everything's going. They tell the fighter it's done. Kerry Hatley did not do that. And so his aggression towards Joaquin Buckley at the end was entirely his own fault. Joaquin Buckley is told, you carry on fighting until the referee tells you to stop. The referee did not get himself in the right position to show Joaquin Buckley that fight was over.
Yeah, we've seen kind of instances before where we've seen refs literally push people out of the way. I think probably the most famous one is with Goddard and Conor McGregor in the when he won the 2 titles in Cage Warriors against Buchenger. He could have done a lot more there. We've seen refs dive across. Yeah, and I was like, in certain ways, I thought Joaquin Buckley was aware of the situation, but I find it hard to criticize him a little bit because, you're just in that killer mindset. And especially when you hurt somebody, you go into that kind of tunnel vision level of thinking. And, we'll probably talk about the Michael Johnson fight in a little bit as well. And something similar happened in that fight too. But yeah, I thought the referee could do better. You got to protect the fighter and you got to do anything in your power. That's what you're in there to do. So, we've seen referees, they almost put themselves in harm's way in the past to protect fighters. But I think an aggressive push out of the way there probably would have been the way to go. He put his hands on him, he touched him, but it wasn't enough. And I think that Fialho took punches that he didn't need to take.
100%. Like, as soon as he saw Fialho drop, if you're going to make the call, you scream stop immediately. You scream stop, 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 stop. As you hear Goddard do, you wave the hands, you get your body in front, and he didn't. And so whatever. I didn't like how he pushed Buckley away afterwards and sort of gave him an aggressive tone. Like, big man, that's your job. Like, it is your sole purpose when the fight's done to protect the fighter. Don't be going. It's not like Joaquin Buckley moved around you to land shots. You were not in the right position. And so, yeah. Anyway, I have a name for Joaquin Buckley, and it's maybe a little bit wild, but I have a name.
What about
Ian Garry?
Oh, I don't think Ian Garry is going to fight down, though. Ian Garry is only looking up right now. I think Joaquin Buckley has a lot more to do if he's going to warrant an Ian Garry fight. He's 13 in the division. I don't think he's going to be wanting to fight down. I like it. As a stylistic matchup. I think Ian Garry probably pieces him up on the feet a little bit, to be honest. But
this is the question. And this is the question for me, right? The question for me in Ian Garry's progression is we've seen him against the low level, right? We've seen him go out and just coast through fights. Gabe Green coasts through fights, do exactly what he needs to do, bank his 15 minutes, look good doing it, fine. We've seen him face a little bit of adversity against more of a veteran in Song Kanan. Fine. We now see him go out against D-Rod, who's a good all-rounder, not a great athlete, but can do a bit of the hitting, can do a bit of everything, a solid generalist, the Brad Tavares, if you will. Now, give me the freak athlete test, because I think, to your point, if Ian Garry is the level of striker, and I've written it in my notes, if Ian Garry is the level of striker that we think he is, he's going to find the uppercuts. He's going to find the high kicks around the corner. He's going to find the angles and the straight right hands when Buckley overreaches. But I don't think there's an athlete of the same caliber around the level of skill that Buckley is until you get all the way to the top. And you don't want to be looking at the freak of the freak athletes like a Kamaru Usman or a Gilbert Burns in some aspects when you're there, or the Khamzat Chimaevs, right? You don't want to be looking at the athlete test then. And so that's the reason I call for Buckley.
And it's a fair shout, and it would be an interesting stylistic matchup. But I think, in my opinion, I think Joaquin Buckley has to kind of somewhat prove himself in the welterweight division, because I think Ian Garry did do that. And he went out there and finished a guy who's not been finished there. So I don't think that Ian Garry is going to want to fight down, nor do I think the UFC is going to want to have him fight down, really. I think the Neil Magny call out was perfect. I think Michael Chiesa is there. I think, this is what you could do. You could put maybe Buckley in with somebody like a Vicente Luque or somebody like that. And give him that chance to get into the rankings. And if he beats Vicente Luque, well, then, I think that would warrant an Ian Garry fight. Then you could get that test then. But yeah, it's an interesting stylistic matchup. And I mean, based off Joaquin Buckley's performance, if he stays going out there and putting on showings like that, he's going to be up there in the rankings in no time. And it could be a fight. Like, we can get caught up in looking at the likes of Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards and Colby Covington and other guys, Gilbert Burns in the welterweight division, and even Stephen Thompson. But they're getting past their sell-by date, and they're not going to be around in 4 or 5 years. You know what I mean? Guys like Ian Garry and Joaquin Buckley are. So it's definitely a worthy shout. I think the fight could happen down the line, but I don't think it should be next for Joaquin Buckley. I think I'd like to see him maybe fight an upper echelon outside of 15, or maybe fight somebody like a Luque, or I don't know if Jack Della Maddalena he's matched up against Sean Brady. I don't know. A lot of guys are tied up there in the top 15 as well. So if Neil Magny goes out and loses, options start becoming limited for Ian Garry then, to be honest, so it'd be interesting to see what happens with that. So fantastic KO knockout, head kick knockout, I should say, by Joaquin Buckley, and another fantastic knockout by Diego Ferreira against Michael Johnson. And from the get-go in this fight, Harry, Ferreira was looking for that right hand all day. He was throwing it with bad intentions, and he didn't give up on it. But it's something that Michael Johnson should have recognized, and he didn't recognize. And it's like, it was a typical like Michael Johnson fighting where he's going to want to go get off his big shots as well. And we've seen him getting knocked out like this before. And it was a nasty, nasty knockout, man. It's the one that that's the type of knockout when I see it's like he doesn't need to be taking any more shots again ever after a knockout like that. It was just completely shut down. And when the camera pans off him and they're not showing his reaction, that he was in bad shape, and hopefully he is all right. He's going to need to take a lot of time to recover after that knockout. But I mean, a fighter of his experience, Harry, should have been looking at that right hand from Ferreira. It clipped him a couple of times even, Ferreira missed it, and then he was finding the mark, and then he ultimately got him on the button, and it was just a vicious, vicious knockout, and a much needed win for Diego Ferreira as well.
Scary finish. Really, really scary finish. I think, when we watch fights, even the Fialho fight, like, he was certainly dazed, and I certainly have absolutely no problem with the stoppage whatsoever. I'm certainly not questioning the stoppage at all. But he was awake, conscious, and yes, he was hurt, but he was still available, right? If you'd have asked him a question at that time, he'd have given you an answer. But when you see a fighter go stiff, like Michael Johnson did, as soon as that right hand connects, it's a scary thing. And I think it really brings back to you what we're watching. What we're watching is two highly trained combat athletes throw bones at each other until something like this happens to one of them. And I agree, from a technical aspect, from an analysis aspect, it felt to me as though Michael Johnson was just convinced that his speed would beat Diego Ferreira to the punch enough that the right hand wasn't going to be as effective. But what does our mate Conor McGregor say? Timing beats speed every time. And you're right that Diego was looking for that right hand. He was loading up that right hand, and he just needed to find the timing. And you could just see him creeping towards it. And then when it landed, we all saw what happened. And I agree, fighter safety first. I don't need to see Michael Johnson fighting anytime soon after a finish like that. I don't need to see Michael Johnson taking shots in sparring footage. I don't need to see Michael Johnson matched up with anyone crazy anytime soon, because Michael Johnson's getting on in his career. He's had some hefty knockouts himself. And Diego Ferreira, like, I really like Diego Ferreira as a fighter, but not the most technical, not the most proficient. And to be seeing a knockout of that severity coming from a man like Diego Ferreira on a man like Michael Johnson, those are when serious conversations start to have to happen.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking myself. Like, Michael Johnson 2-6 in his last 8 right now. And, receiving a shot like that and his reaction to that shot tells its own story. And yeah, like you said, there's going to have to be a conversation had with his coaches, with his family, to see what's next. He's been a great servant to the UFC. He's been in some memorable moments in the octagon, but that was a scary one for me as well. Like you said, it's the reality of the situation where we were speaking the weekend about comparing in sports and making mistakes and the cost of those mistakes. And there is no other sport comparable to mixed martial arts or any combat sports for when you make a mistake, because the consequences are very, very severe. And we saw that on Saturday night. For Ferreira, he went in there, got the win. Like I said, a much needed win. He snapped a 3-fight losing streak. I see here, looking at his past record, he was matched up with a Drakkar Close. Maybe we can put that fight together again. I don't really know. He's a guy we're not going to be able to build him into the division in lightweight. He's coming towards the end of his career as well, at 38 years of age. So what would you like to see next for Ferreira? It's just going to be whether he wants to continue to fight and throwing him in. Like, it's unrealistic. like we talk about maybe making a run for the title. He's not going to be even able to make a run for the top 15 in this case.
I mean, maybe he can. The top 15, that is not the title, obviously. But I think for now, Diego Ferreira is going to fall into that veteran fighting, veteran having fun fight category.
Yeah.
And for me, can I offer you a Diego Ferreira Matt Frivola?
Oh, yes. Wonderful fight. Yeah.
Because that to me is like Matt Frivola, solid enough fighter. I think he's just broken into the rankings. He's never getting the Paddy Pimblett fight. Paddy Pimblett is never taking that fight in a month of Sundays. Diego Ferreira would take that fight. Diego Ferreira would happily stand and bang with somebody like Matt Frivola. And so Matt Frivola, that's the type of fight he's looking for. Let's see that type of fight. Like that to me is a kind of where he goes now, you know? Like he's had his stiff tests. He failed those stiff tests, Diego Ferreira, that is. And that's fine, right? That's absolutely fine. No problems. It happens. In MMA, not everyone can be the best fighters, no problem. But now, as he slides down the other side of the mountain of his career, let's just stick him in fun fights that are competitive with guys of the similar ilk. To me, that's a Matt Frivola, Drew Dober, those types of fights.
Indeed. 1 hour in, and that's the main card covered. Let's breeze through the prelim fights and have a quick conversation. Vladislav Borshev picked up another great knockout win against Machete in the lightweight division. It was a good stylistic matchup for Slava Claus here, wasn't it, Harry? And, you know, we saw flashes of his old self. But, you know, obviously the gaping hole in his game is his grappling. We've seen him kind of being taken advantage in that department. But Machete was a good kind of, like I said, stylistic matchup for him. A guy who was willing to stand and bang and you know, had some good moments in the fight, but ultimately it was the technical ability of Slava Claus here that got the job done. Lovely right hook and finishing off with some ground and pound, but landed some great body shots and just had a wide range of variation on the feet as well. It was a good, impressive performance from Borshev, wasn't it?
Damn right. Yeah. Like I like the leg kicks, really like the body work. You know, we talked about, you know, we talked about with Buckley and Fiallo implementing a game plan that makes your opponent uncomfortable in all areas. Well, that was exactly what Borshev did here to Mahashate. And that was like, in the long range, just battered him with leg kicks. Up close in the pocket, he would batter him with body shots. And then in the clinches, at any given opportunity in those clinch situations, he was looking to angle off, make a forearm grip, angle off, and then land the right hand. And Mahashate did absolutely nothing to stop it, did absolutely nothing to dissuade Borshev from getting in the clinch, actually initiated some clinch situations himself, which seemed maniacal to me. And I really liked Borshev's performance. I think the thing that frustrated me drastically in this, and Shawnee and I have literally just recorded a Speaker's Corner today on this, and that's the thing that frustrates me is I think if Borshev doesn't take that eye poke, and it was a bad eye poke, blood immediately pouring out of his eye, told his corner in between rounds that he couldn't see anything in the eye. If that doesn't happen, I think he finishes Mahashate in the first round because he drops him early, drops him at the end of the round, lands some shots. But there's a period there where, one, he closes his eye for the rest of the minute and a half left in round one. So obviously that's a compromised fighter. But the time he had to take off, it fluctuates his rhythm, ruins the patterns that he was in. And then you have to go and you have to build back into the fight and build back up and do the whole thing. And it gives Mahashate 3 minutes to recover, right? Like that's an insane amount of time for a fighter that's just been beaten from pillar to post for 2.5 minutes to have that extra breathing room. And so there's a point, and check out the Speaker's Corner when it comes out, please. Thanks. Support the Patreon, etc., etc. But there is a point, I think, where referees have to be more unforgiving in their taking of points, frankly, when we're calling fouls. But let's not derail it into that too much. I completely agree. Borshev looked great. Fantastic variety in his work. If he can find fights to the same ability while he plugs the holes in his grappling, we've got a fighter.
Yeah, like I mean, for him to even come back after that eye poke was unreal. Showed the heart that he had and determination to go out there and get a legitimate win. I'm not saying that if he got an eye poke, it wouldn't have been. It probably would have been labeled a low contest. I don't know what was in the first round, so it wouldn't been able to go to the scorecard. So maybe he had that in the back of his head as well. But basically doing what he did and fighting through it, getting a knockout, massively, massively impressive. Karolina Kowalkiewicz picked up a unanimous decision over Vanessa Demopoulos. What did you think of this fight as a whole, Harry?
Vanessa Demopoulos is not a UFC level fighter, and Karolina Kowalkiewicz just battered her from pillar to post for 3 rounds, and that's exactly what it looked like, exactly what it was going to look like. And really, I would love to sit down. The takeaway from this fight is I'd love to sit down with Karolina Kowalkiewicz and just ask what's changed. Just ask what's happened. Just a really torrid time 3 fights ago, and now to turn it all around, coming in, riding a 3-fight win streak. Like, I just love to know what changes she's made personally, sort of professionally, in her camp, in her preparations. I'd love to know. But
there was some kind of I heard her speaking before about some kind of personal issues and maybe mental health issues, which is obviously going to be a big crutch if you do have those going into fight in the cage. So I'm glad that she's figured herself out, because she really fell off a cliff from the level of fighter that she was into going through that dark patch. But now it's a fantastic story to see her going in there, and it was just pure experience of being in there with high level opponents mixed with a new level of confidence that just seen her absolutely dominating this fight as well. And it was just it's been a real feel good story to see her in there. Always has been a good fighter. Got up to that title shot with Joanna, didn't get the job done. She wasn't showing her true capabilities during that losing streak. And like you said, something has clicked, and it'd be very interesting to hear exactly what it was. I guess, it's a tough old business, the fight game, when you're going through stuff and you have to bring that into the cage with you. And then when things aren't going your way, it can all get a little bit overbearing. And we've seen this happen with other fighters too, Harry, and they haven't come back. So we have to give her all the credit in the world for kind of picking herself back up. And now she's on a 3-fight winning streak. And I'd love to see her in there. Let's get her in there with a ranked opponent next. Why not? I think she deserves it now at this stage.
I agree. Like, it's a name to build, an easy marketable name, massive European name, huge European name. And so, yeah, absolutely. Let's see it. No problem.
100%. Gilbert Urbina picked up a nice front kick to the body in finishing Orion Kosuke in the 170-pound division. Any quick thoughts on this fight?
Orion Kosuke should be cut immediately. I don't know whether there was a rib injury going in, but Urbina made it plainly obvious from moment one what was going to happen, and Kosuke did absolutely nothing to change it. So, yeah, let's get rid of him immediately.
Indeed. Rodrigo Nascimento won a split decision over Ilir Latifi, and the Harry waving on is on, and I'm going to oblige. Not a great fight. Just your standard low-level heavyweight fight that we've seen plenty of over a couple of UFC cards. Let's talk about Chase Hooper and Nick Fiore. Chase Hooper picked up the unanimous decision win. I watched this back, and I caught a glimpse of some of the thoughts on Twitter, and everyone was talking Chase Hooper's striking game up. So I was coming into this fight thinking I was going to see some level of a masterclass for the way people were talking about it, but it was sloppy, it was sluggish, it was wild, it was like a schoolyard fight at times, to be honest. And look, at the move up in weight is good for Chase Hooper, but I don't know. What are we doing here, Harry? What are we doing here?
Yeah, I don't know. It feels to me like this is another Edmen Shahbazyan in waiting. It's just a slightly slower ticking time bomb. Like, look, I will give him his props. He certainly looked better in the striking. He certainly looked more powerful. He looked like he carried a little bit more tenacity and willingness to his striking. Certainly looked less gun shy. Similar to Mackenzie Dern maybe 2 or 3 fights ago, where she's just trying to barrel through things and the striking is very awkward and flimsy, but you can tell that the work is happening. right?
He
Now,
looked nice and big in as well. Like he put on a little bit of muscle as well. The move up obviously to 155 is going to help that too, and he has still a lot more filling out to do as well. But I'll let you continue before I share any other thoughts.
no, and I agree 100%. Like Chase Hooper is a child still. Let's be honest, and so those weight jumps are absolutely going to happen. He won't be at 155 forever either. If he continues his career and continues to put muscle on and continues to grow, he'll be a 170 or a 185 fighter by the end of everything, right? Maybe a 170 is probably more realistic, but you know. He's just not a good MMA fighter. And that's really harsh to say. And that's not to say he cannot become a good MMA fighter, but he is not a good MMA fighter. He is too willing to play bottom in grappling exchanges. He's too willing to give up positions in grappling exchanges. As you rightfully said, at times the striking is schoolyard sloppy-esque. And Nick Fiore is a perfect opponent because he's not a good MMA fighter either, and was willing to trade on the ground and was willing to be in those sorts of jiu-jitsu based exchanges. But there's only so many fights you can find for Chase Hooper like this. And for me, if you continue to find fights that are good stylistic matchups for him, well, eventually he's going to rack up a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fight winning streak. And then you're going to have to give him somebody, you know? You're going to have to find him an ex fighter that's then going to truck him. And my real disappointment here is it is likely, given how difficult of a game MMA is for skill acquisition alone, you're not going to, or it's going to be very, very difficult to find Chase Hooper the right fights that will allow him to then round out his game so that he can even be competitive if he ever gets a number next to his name. But it's a
That's
really
why,
tough situation.
yeah, like that, like in order for him to grow, he has to be fighting that level of competition, like Nick Fury here. The question is how long are the UFC going to be willing to do that with him? Are they going to allow him to the time to grow? And history would tell us that they're probably not, to be honest, because it's just they'll just run fighters through the mill, and they'll pick up some other young and up and comer as well that's going to come in and replace Chase Hooper. And yeah, you're right. We have a case of the Edmen Shahbazyans here, whereas everyone will come up dreaming about being in the UFC, but sometimes be careful what you wish for. Because sometimes, we'll talk a lot about Paddy Pimblett, but his decision to hold off on the UFC has turned out to be a very, very, very smart one, to be honest. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of other fighters should be taking a leaf out of his book when it comes to that. In having that level of knowledge and understanding in yourself to know when you feel that you're ready, rather than jumping at an opportunity. And it must be so hard, Harry. It must be so hard when you do get that offer. But that's a decision you make and your team makes for you as well. It's a conversation you need to be having. But I mean, there's a long, long way to go with Chase Hooper, and I just hope he doesn't get chewed up and spit out before he has his time to develop into the fighter that he can become. What his ceiling is, we don't know. I'd be fairly confident in saying that, to me, at this early stage, even, he doesn't look like championship material. And it's just, yeah, I just hope the UFC match him fairly and correctly for the next 5 or 6 fights, really. Let's be real. And see where those developments. He needs a lot of work on the feet. He needs to mix in his striking and his grappling so much better as well. And I think he just doesn't know what style of a fighter he is yet. He hasn't found himself inside the octagon yet. And that's a dangerous, dangerous place to be in, really, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And I think that you're right that it's so hard to not do it. And I think Paddy Pimblett is a really interesting case because he was in a unique situation himself. Cage Warriors afforded him a more profitable contract than is usual in for the promotion, right? That was well documented. Talking of Paddy Pimblett, I would not be shocked if they match up Chase Hooper and Paddy Pimblett. I really wouldn't. I wouldn't be shocked at all.
You think?
I wouldn't be shocked because, like, let's think about this, right? This is nothing to do with rankings. This is nothing to do with having a competitive technical contest. This is Paddy needing a name. Chase Hooper has enough of a name around him that people know that, oh, he's Ben Askren's son and he's, whatever. And you can put together enough of a highlight reel that you can fill that out. It's a massive step back in competition in terms of the actual level of fight that Paddy would be having. But again, what are we doing with Paddy? Do you know what I mean? Like, he goes out, he has the fight with Jared Gordon, it goes the way it goes. Jared Gordon's not that many levels above a Chase Hooper in terms of the hierarchy of the divisions, right? In terms of skill set, he's massively, massively way higher. But in terms of the hierarchy of the division, he's not leaps and bounds. And so if you're the UFC and you're looking to build an A side of one or the other, I mean, that's the type of shit.
You'll be putting in like it'd be a good comeback fight for Paddy. You're after kind of sparking a little bit of thought there. Like, I mean, it's a good comeback fight for Paddy. It's a good opportunity for Paddy to go out there and get a knockout, to be honest, from what I've seen. So, I mean, I don't hate the idea.
I hate it for Chase Hooper because for Chase Hooper, that's like, what's he going to do? Out-grapple him? I don't think so. Like, I think Paddy's submission potency is better than Chase's. I think if they had a jiu-jitsu match, I'd probably favor Chase in that straight sport grappling match. But Paddy is a big 155er. I don't mean that, harshly, but he hits way harder. I think his boxing fundamentals are far, far, far better. And he understands that being on bottom is bad. And yeah, I don't know. I don't like that stylistic matchup for Chase at all. But I suspect that it's something the UFC would entertain.
Yeah, I could see it happen. Very entertaining was the performance of Natalia Silva. The Sphere spotlight was shone on her this week, and very deservingly so. She went out there and put on another fantastic performance. And look at this. In my opinion, we've got a good contender here in the 125-pound division. She has picked up her 10th win in a row. She's on a real good run right now. She's going out there. Obviously, look at won her first fight by unanimous decision, but picked up 2 really good knockouts against Terra Blaza and Victoria Leonardo here. This one, Leonardo didn't even get out with the first round or the punches, and it was a vicious head kick that finished the fight. Just talk me through why you decided. I think, it's fairly... I understand why you shone the spotlight on her, but please break down your decision to shine the severe spotlight on her this week. It was a tremendous performance by a very, very exciting fighter.
Absolutely. And sure, look, in the essence of time, I'll keep it briefer, but obviously go and check out the severe spotlight if you're interested in slightly longer explanations. But finishes in women's MMA are tough to come by. 2 finishes back-to-back in the UFC is a rare occurrence. But the way in which, especially not by submission, but by knockout, that tells me something. It tells me something about the level of confidence that Natalia Silva fights with. It tells me something about the variety with which she fights with. And it tells me something about the willingness to be in there, the enjoyment of being in there. And those are all things that we look for when we're talking about prospects. Those are the things we talk about and look for when we're looking for contenders and future potential stars of the division. Now, look, that's not to say that Natalia Silva doesn't have things to fix. She certainly does. But she's gone out in the last 3 performances and she's shown variety. She's shown dexterity. She's shown me stance switching. She's shown me punching going backwards. She's shown me striking going forwards. She's shown me jamming. She's shown me a willingness to finish, a cold-bloodedness when it comes to finishing. She has shown me sort of an almost an overzealous nature to finish when she smells blood. And those things can be turned and tweaked and whatever. She's only 25, so there's absolutely plenty of time. And the thing that excites me the most really about Natalia Silva is it's so difficult to get a fighter who has the right physical age mixed with the right level of skill acquisition on the right trajectory, the same level of fight experience, or like a good level of fight experience on the right trajectory, and
I'd say
then
it's a great level. Sorry, a great level of fight experience at 26 years of age. To have 21 fights under your belt is a huge benefit to have.
I mean, this is exactly what I'm saying, right? To have the right levels in all of these columns, to then put yourself in a place like the UFC and to be match made correctly to build is so rare. And I feel like we have that with Natalia Silva. Now, that doesn't mean she's going to be a champion. That doesn't mean that she's going to be a superstar. We could find out in the next couple of fights that she's actually not what we thought she was. But there are lots and lots of columns ticked off for me in the I need to watch this fighter spreadsheet. And yeah, I'm excited.
Like, I hope the UFC give her a main card slot next at the very least. I mean, the Terra fight was buried on the undercard. You know, you hit a spinning back kick knockout, and she was on the undercard here again. Dana White spoke about it. He wasn't even in the place to see her perform. You know, she needs a little bit more respect, I think, when it comes to that. But I mean, yeah, she's going out there, she's doing the damn thing, and she is a contender. What are you thinking next? Are you looking for another opponent outside the top 15? Like, we're not in any rush here, really, aren't we? Not, or do you think the level of performances that she's been showing us would warrant a bigger step up in competition, and maybe a ranked opponent? What are you thinking? Because the 125-pound division is a very talent-rich division now in the UFC.
It absolutely is. Like, I still don't have a problem with the Lupa Godinez offering that we spoke
That's right.
about earlier.
Yeah.
If we were marketing specifically for Natalia Silva, I think there are a couple of options. I don't mind the Tracy Cortez fight because I do want to see somebody that's extremely grapple heavy go in, and I need to see that test. And so Tracy Cortez riding, a nice record herself. Let's see that. Let's see go in. She's gone in and she's looked to improve her boxing. She's looked to improve her hands. We could go out and give Natalia Silva a Jojo Wood type performance, who that's somebody that she undoubtedly will perform very well against, but it's a name. It's somewhere that you loft her into a position where more people will have eyes on her. I wouldn't mind a Morena Moroz type performance or a Montala De La Rosa type fight, simply because those are stalwarts of the division, well-rounded enough, and we'll just get to see. It's just a little bit of a step up. And so I think we have an opportunity of a veteran if we want sort of a let's give over a name, right? Let's build her up via a name. We have what I think would be a really competitive fight in a Lupa Godinez / Trace Cortez performance, or there is the option of let's just slow build. And so I have no problem with any of them. I think my preference would be to slow build. Let's just give her the next step up, or the Lupa Godinez, Tracy Cortez, and just push it just a touch. Let's not necessarily run it all the way. I don't really need to see the Jojo Wood because I think everyone kind of understands how that fight would go if it were to happen. But I think let's see a skill acquisition test. If we then pass the skill acquisition test, I've then got no problem with a Jojo Wood or an Andrea Lee type performance where you put her in the main card against somebody that people know, people respect, people are aware of, and you then allow her to build off that name. But before we do the name building, generally the way that I would like to build fighters is let's make sure that we're comfortable with the level of skill acquisition first before we allow them to go in. It's one of the reasons why, like you've already pointed out, the Ian Gary Neil Magny call out was perfect, because now we are comfortable that Ian Gary is absolutely on that trajectory of skill acquisition. There's no questions about it. His performances have proved that. And so now if he goes out and destroys Neil Magny, great. We already know where he is, we already know.
100%. I really like, and it slipped my mind, I really like that Lupi Godinez fight. I think that would be tremendous for both fighters, and seeing where both of them are in their skill set. So finishing off, Temba Gorimbo picked up the unanimous decision win over Takeshi Sato, putting Zimbabwe MMA on the map. We're not going to spend too much time on that. Look, he picked up his first UFC win, has a long ways to go. And if you'd like to say something on this, if you had looked back and you have a few thoughts, be my guest.
My only thoughts for this fight is the sadness that surrounds the coverage of Tembe Garimbo, and that's ESPN tweeted out today. And I don't usually do this, right? I don't usually jump in and give opinions on articles or whatever. But ESPN tweeted out something along the lines of the Garimbo story is fantastic. The word they used was fantastic. And the story was that going into this fight, Garimbo had $7 in his account, and that Colby Covington was kind enough to pay for Garimbo's food for this fight camp. And he also mentioned that the trifecta meal prep stuff that the UFC athletes get was one of the main reasons why he was actually able to eat this camp. And for me, the incredible oversight from ESPN, one, but also I think just how we view these fighters at large from a fan's perspective is illuminating in just that tweet, because the fans will look at that and say, wow, that's inspirational, or that's wonderful, or that's something, that's the next thing. Timbo Garimbe has gone out and has been fighting at elite level for 2 times. What I mean by elite level, he is signed for the premier MMA organization. In any other sport, whether that's NFL, whether that's NBA, whatever it is, when you sign for that major league, you're set now. You're an elite level athlete. Now, for whatever reason, you could be cut from those things, whatever. But when you sign, you are determined as an elite level athlete in your sport. If you're signed, if you go and look at the last draft, the last player drafted in the NBA or the NFL, they don't have $7 in their account.
Yeah, that was a pretty amazing story. And you know what? We talk a lot of shit about Colby Covington, but fair play to him as well. I think in certain right, showing his true colors. I mean, the act that he puts on doesn't make him too favorable of a guy. And some of the stuff that he has been saying. But we have to give credit where credit is due. And yeah, crazy situation for Garimbo to be in. And I feel that there's so many of those little hidden stories with all of these fighters, and I wish it's so hard to kind of keep up with them to help develop those stories as well. We wouldn't have found that out about him unless he told us until he told it himself. And I don't know whose responsibility is to try and get those stories out. I know Spencer does a great job on UFC.com, trying his very best to get those stories out of each fighter each and every week. So, but there's only so much time in the day, as you know. And speaking about time, our time is up here for the balance breakdown. We are wrapped up for the latest UFC card. Mackenzie Dern, Angela Hill, lots of stories coming out of this. Harry, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your thoughts, and your opinions. It's an absolute pleasure for me to come in and sit in with you to hear them each and every week. I appreciate it a lot. And we will be back again. Do we have an off week this week in the UFC?
That's a good question. I don't even know. I don't
where are we at here? Let's take a quick check before we wrap it up. Yeah, I believe we do have an off week next week. The balance breakdown. We'll come back next week. We'll highlight some news stories. That's what we'll do. We'll still bring the breakdown back for you. Next week we will mold a couple of stories. We'll mold a podcast together, even though we aren't going to have to talk about fights. And yeah, we'll be back next Tuesday with something. We'll break down something, Harry. As yet unnamed topic or topics. So thanks to everybody for listening. Head over to SevereMMA Patreon. Check out the Severe Spotlight for a detailed breakdown of Natalia Silva's excellent win on Saturday night. Each and every Monday, you can catch that on SevereMMA.com. Speaker's Corner on the Patreon. Check that out too. You're on a good roll yourself and Shawnee lately. There've been some pretty good ones, and I think it's always been consistently good. But someone's I really like the recent ones now. I feel that you've really hit a groove when it comes to that. So you can check that out on the Patreon as well. And the Old Triangle will be back this week as well. Follow Harry Powell at BJJ_Harry Powell and myself at I O'Neill MMA on all social media. Thank you for tuning in. Hit the like button, subscribe button, tell a friend. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you again very, very soon.